I've got a piece up. It's over at Raw Story and in Common Dreams, and I'm guessing it's going to show up in a few more places, talking about how basically the slave patrol never went away. The slave patrols of Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, they were part of the Constitution of those states back when when we operated under the Articles of Confederation. The Second Amendment was changed. They dropped the word country and replaced it with the word state in the Virginia Ratifying Convention in the summer of 1788 at the request of Patrick Henry, the largest slaveholder in Virginia, in order to give primacy, for the state militias to have more power than the federal militia, essentially, than the power to federalize. I lay all this out in my book, The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment, which I think is more timely now than it's ever been. It's amazing that book just came out a couple months ago, and it's like stepping into a time machine. It goes all the way back to the founding of the Republic, and then it comes right up to right now. And in the previous hour, I was talking about how, wealthy people, wealthy Republicans specifically, there's a lot of very good, wealthy progressives out there. Let's just stipulate that. But how right-wing billionaires have basically been willing to sell this country out for, ever since the late 70s, since 76, the Buckley decision, when the Supreme Court legalized billionaires owning politicians, and then which brought Reagan into office, a politician entirely owned by the billionaire class. Back then it was the multimillionaire class. And it's just continued right up to this day. Paul Krugman is talking about it. How this perpetual inequality. In fact, I printed it out. I don't know what happened to it. But anyhow, Paul Krugman is talking about how this perpetual inequality, or this constant increase in inequality as a result of Republican tax policies, has wiped out the middle class, and now the white middle class in particular is sitting around going, we're screwed. Who screwed us? And what are the Republicans saying? What is Donald Trump saying? It's the brown people from south of the border. And what should we do about that? Well, somebody in a rally says to Donald Trump, shoot them, and Trump goes, ha, 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 ha. Right. But there's a larger issue here that concerns me tremendously. And that is the rise of fascism in this country that is being driven by these forces. Sean Hannity last night on Fox and Friends said, every school, what should we do? We should put armed people, not police, armed civilians around every school. He said, secure the perimeter of those schools, equip them with retired police and military. They should be on every floor of every school. Now, let me just tell you, there are 100,000 public schools and 35,000 private, K through 12 schools. There's 135,000 schools in America. There's 116,000 shopping malls. So between the two of them, you've got about 250,000 locations. And in the entire country, we have 700,000 police officers. So in order to put 5 or 10 armed civilians in each one of these 250,000 locations, you're going to need more than twice as many armed civilians as we have cops. The Hannity force, right? Doesn't this sound familiar? You ever heard of the Sturmabteilung? And I'm sure I'm mangling that, but it was the main paramilitary wing of the Nazi Party. These were volunteers. Hitler said, we need volunteers to show up and protect our party and protect our people. I mean, the most famous, the beginning of the essay, the brown shirts, the volunteers. They wore brown shirts because there was all this surplus. There were all the German army in World War I had ordered millions of brown uniform shirts. And they were left over from World War I, and they were super cheap. And so, this became the official uniform of the volunteers. Sort of like, the modern uniform, you'll recall, before the Charlottesville massacre, the guy who put the thing together, Mr. Anglin, as I recall, sent out an email to his group saying, it's going to be a lot of cameras, we got to look very normal, khaki slacks, and polo shirts. And so what did all those Nazis wear in Charlottesville? Khaki pants and polo shirts. What did Mike Pence wear when he went down, and part of his group, his cabinet, when they went down to look at one of the detention centers filled with brown people? They wore khaki pants and polo shirts. Well, in 1923, for Hitler's volunteers, it was slacks and brown shirts, because brown shirts were normal, they were ubiquitous, and they were cheap. Just like polo shirts and khakis. And they started out basically as the SA. The beer hall push in Munich, that this was basically a riot. It was like Charlottesville. It was a riot on behalf of Hitler. And then over the next couple of years, they went up to Upper Silesia. This is the German border with Poland, to protect against Poles coming into Germany. Volunteers at the border. Does this sound familiar? This is how the SA got started. In fact, Hitler was calling the Poles who were coming into Germany looking for work invaders, infiltrators, and traitors. Those were his words. So here's what Sean Hannity had to say on Fox News last night.
But let's stop school shootings. We'll start there. Let's stop mall shootings. We'll start there. I'd like to see the perimeter of every school in America surrounded, secured by retired police,
you get this?
Which you are, retired Secret Service, which you are, military,
right.
And I want guys to donate 15 hours. I think we could cover every school, every hour, every day, add a metal detector, and I think we're going to have safer schools. Have one armed guard on every floor of every school, and all over every mall.
And let's take it to our
and inside every hall of every mall. Now, that gives us an instant response opportunity that we normally wouldn't have. Would that save lives in your humble, your expert opinion?
So how did that work out in Germany back in 1924? When this weird little guy with a mustache, who nobody took seriously and was constantly spitting and foaming at the mouth about those immigrants from Poland, and the volunteer force, the brown shirts, they were all volunteers. They were not paid for by the state. They were not armed by the state. Their uniforms didn't come from the state. They were volunteers. Number one. And number two, how about just the practical reality of it? As Samuel Singenway tweets, after Columbine, 10,000 school police officers were hired just in case another school shooting happened. This is all across the country. 10,000 after Columbine, police officers put in our schools. What has been the result of that? Have any of those school police officers stopped even one shooting? No, not one. But they have arrested over 1 million children. Over 1 million children now have criminal records because we put cops in our schools. Abraham Maslow said, when the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. When the only tool you have is a cop, when you're running a school, then every discipline problem looks like a crime. What a surprise. Just in the 2013 school year alone, 70,000 students were arrested, 2/3 of them students of color. In Columbine, there were actually school police there. There were 2 of them. I mean, you go through the list. Samuel again tweets these. The Demi Middle School, the shooter was arrested, not by the school police. In Buell Elementary, the 3rd shooting, mass shooting, these were school shootings. An unarmed teacher takes down the shooter in the Lake Fort Worth, the 4th school shooting. I mean, we could just go right through the list. Shooter flags down police, turns himself in. In the fifth one, Santana High, school security tried to stop the shooter but got killed. The shooter was caught by police later. Red Lion High, now the sixth school shooting after Columbine. The shooter committed suicide. Ricori High, a gym coach disarmed the shooter, an unarmed gym coach. In Red Lake High, the eighth school shooting, the shooter committed suicide. The ninth school shooting after Columbine, Campbell High, the shooter was disarmed by an unarmed teacher. The 10th school shooting, Essex Elementary, the shooter shot himself. The 11th school shooter, Weston High, unarmed janitor, an unarmed principal disarmed the shooter. The 12th school shooting, West Nickel Mines, the shooter committed suicide. The 13th, Miller South, committed suicide. I mean, it just goes on like this. The 14th, Chardon High, the shooter was chased out of school by an unarmed teacher. The 15th was Sandy Hook, the shooter committed suicide. The 16th, Sparks Middle, the shooter committed suicide. The 17th, Arapahoe High, the shooter committed suicide. I mean, where are the Hannity forces going to be? Where are the brown shirts? Well, they don't seem to have helped out with school or mall shootings. In fact, the one mall shooting that I can think of where a, quote, good guy with a gun actually stopped a shooter, the good guy with the gun was an African-American who himself was shot by the police when they showed up because they thought, oh, it's a black guy. He must be, and he's got a gun. He must be the shooter. And Hannity wants to put we got 700,000 cops in this country. We're going to put 1 million armed people in our malls and our schools. Not to mention, I mean, you've already got that. You had, Sheriff Mack on this program talking about how him and the sheriffs were taking a bunch of people down to the southern border to patrol the border. This is exactly what the brown shirts were doing in 1924, 1925, only it was the border with Poland. Those Polish invaders, those vermin, that infestation, that invasion of Poles looking for jobs into Germany. Holy cow, does history repeat itself or what?